Mordecai thought that if he could just make everything perfect, get the girl, prove to his friends that he had it all together, everything would finally fall into one place. Instead, he ended up falling apart in front of everyone he was trying to impress. Laundry Woes starts as a simple episode about laundry and a road trip, but it asks something much deeper. What happens when the person who always tries to keep it together finally breaks down, and in the process, pushes everyone away? That question will unfold when we see Mordecai's life split into two realities. On one side, there's Rigby, his best friend, his partner in chaos, and the one who's been through thick and thin. Even when Mordecai doesn't know how to ask for help, who are these guys? It's always a wild ride. Yeah, and you're gonna need a lot of gas money for this one. On the other, there's Margaret, his lost connection, the girl who's moving on while he's stuck in the past, desperately clinging to a sweater as if it could bring everything back. What happens when someone's worst fear, being forgotten, becomes their reality? And who will be left to pick up the pieces? In this video, we're going to break down Laundry Woes and take a closer look at how Mordecai's breakdowns show just how fragile it is when you try to keep everything under control. But before we start, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our upcoming videos. To understand why Mordecai completely shuts down in Laundry Woes, we need to look at what came before. The episode Dumped at the Altar shows us the moment everything started falling apart. Mordecai had been juggling feelings for two women, Margaret, his old crush, and CJ, his current girlfriend. But beneath the surface, there's something more painful happening. Margaret had already moved away for college, creating her own new life filled with people and experiences that didn't include him. She was growing, changing, and becoming someone new, and Mordecai wasn't part of that journey. Instead of being honest about his feelings, he tried to avoid hurting anyone. But at Muscle Man's wedding, everything exploded. In front of everyone, Mordecai gave a rambling speech about soulmates and not knowing who his perfect person was. He literally said he didn't even know if his soulmate was even in the room, while his girlfriend CJ sat right there watching. The humiliation was complete when CJ stood up, threw his bracelet at him, and walked out crying. She didn't even let him finish whatever he was trying to say. This wasn't just a regular breakup. This was public humiliation, mixed with the realization that his indecision had hurt the people he cared about. But more than that, it confirmed Mordecai's deepest fear, that his inability to make decisions and commit would drive away the people he cared about most, leaving him alone while everyone else found their place in the world. Laundry Woes picks up after this disaster, and right away, you can see something is very wrong with Mordecai. The episode starts with him and Rigby doing laundry, but Mordecai isn't really there. He's going through the motions, but emotionally, he's completely checked out. Then, Margaret's pink sweater shows up in their laundry. This is a direct reminder of everything Mordecai has lost and all the choices he's avoided making. The sweater represents Margaret's absence, her new life at college, all the experiences they're not sharing together. It's proof that she was there in his space and then left again to return to a world where he doesn't belong. Rigby immediately knows this is bad news. He can see what's about to happen, but he can't stop it. There's panic in Rigby's voice.
Oh no. Don't do anything you're gonna regret. Don't do it!
Because he recognizes that Mordecai is spiraling towards something destructive, and that creates a new fear. What if his breakdown pushes away even his most loyal friend? When Mordecai holds that sweater up to his face and takes a deep breath, it's like watching someone deliberately hurt themselves. The memories come flooding back, all the good times of Margaret's, all the what ifs, all the roads not taken. But instead of processing these feelings in a healthy way, Mordecai latches onto a fantasy. Margaret must have left his sweater for him to find. She must want him to return it to her. This is classic avoidance behavior, but it's also driven by a desperate need to feel relevant to someone who has moved on. Instead of dealing with his pain of his recent breakup with CJ, instead of confronting his own rule and the mess he created, Mordecai creates a new mission. He's going to drive 20 hours to return a sweater to his ex, who's now in college.
We're going to her college, aren't we?
Yes.
You're gonna drive 20 hours to give Margaret a sweater? She probably doesn't even know it's missing.
It sounds ridiculous, because it is ridiculous, but it's also exactly what people do when they can't bear the thought of being completely erased from someone's life. The 20-hour drive becomes a perfect metaphor for how far people will go to avoid dealing with their emotions. Rigby knows this is a terrible idea. He tries everything to stop Mordecai, reasoning with him, literally throwing the sweater out the window, even rapping at him about how he's being obsessive. But Mordecai can't hear any of it, because accepting that Margaret has moved on means accepting that he's been left behind, and that thought is unbearable. When Rigby calls him a sad sack chump, Mordecai completely loses it. He kicks his best friend out of the car in the middle of nowhere. This is the moment where we see how fear of abandonment has actually created abandonment. In his terror of being left alone, Mordecai pushes away the one person who has never left him. The Mordecai we know would never abandon Rigby like this, but the Mordecai in crisis is so consumed by fear of being forgotten that he can't see how he's creating the very situation he's trying to avoid. Then comes the most unsettling part of the episode, the hallucination. Mordecai starts seeing Margaret everywhere, made out of laundry in the car, talking to him, encouraging his delusion. The ghost tells him exactly what he wants to hear, that returning the sweater is all that matters, that Margaret will quit college to be with him. The hallucination is Mordecai's mind creating a version of Margaret who still needs him, who would sacrifice her growth and independence to maintain their connection. It's his desperate fantasy of being so important to someone that they would give up their dreams just to keep him in their life. But even in his hallucination, part of Mordecai knows that this is wrong. When the Margaret ghost says she'll quit school for him, he pushes back. Deep down, he knows Margaret worked hard to get into her dreams goal.
Give Margaret the sweater. The sooner she'll quit school and be with you. The two of you will be happy forever.
That's not true. Margaret worked really hard to get into school. She wouldn't just quit.
He knows she shouldn't just throw it away. The fantasy takes the wheel, literally, and it drives him straight into reality. Then, Mordecai literally crashes into a statue at the college. He's hit rock bottom, both literally and figuratively. After the crash, something changes. The laundry scattered around the car is just laundry again. The hallucination is gone. For the first time in the episode, Mordecai seems to actually see where he is and what he's doing. He spots Margaret across the campus, living her new life, talking with friends about classes and lectures. She looks happy and engaged. She's exactly where she's supposed to be. And in that moment, Mordecai finally understands something crucial. This isn't about Margaret at all. It never was. It's about his own inability to accept that people can care about him and still grow beyond him. That love doesn't always mean staying in the same place forever. Watching Margaret in her element, thriving in her new environment, Mordecai has to confront a painful but necessary truth. She doesn't need him to be happy. Her life is full and meaningful without him in it. That realization could be devastating, but instead, it becomes liberating. If Margaret can be happy without him, then maybe happiness isn't about being indispensable to other people. The sweater goes in the trash because Mordecai finally realizes that returning it was never really about doing the right thing. It was about manufacturing a reason to insert himself back into her life, to matter to her again. Throwing it away is an act of letting go, not just of Margaret, but of the need to be at the center of everyone's world in order to feel valuable. When Rigby finally catches up, exhausted from running who knows how many miles, Mordecai can finally be honest. He didn't give Margaret the sweater. Rigby was right to stop him. And together, they look at the destroyed car and wonder if Muscle Man will notice the damage. It's a small moment of normalcy that shows Mordecai is starting to come back to himself. Laundry Woes is remarkable because it shows what emotional breakdown actually looks like for many people. It's not dramatic or attention-seeking, it's quiet and internal. Mordecai doesn't have a screaming fit or hurt anyone else, except for abandoning Rigby, which he immediately regrets. Instead, he just stops functioning normally. The episode shows how trauma and heartbreak can make people completely irrational decisions that seem to make perfect sense to them in the moment. Mordecai's 20-hour road trip to return a sweater is objectively insane, but it makes sense to him because it gives him something to focus on other than his real problems. And more importantly, it offers the illusion that he still matters to someone who has moved on. It also shows how isolation makes everything worse. When Mordecai kicks Rigby out of the car, he's literally and figuratively cutting himself off from the people who care about him. And that's when the hallucinations start. That's when he loses his grip on reality completely. The episode doesn't make the connection explicitly, but it's there. The fear of being alone can make you push away the people who would never leave you. Most importantly, the episode shows that hitting rock bottom isn't the end of the story. The moment Mordecai throws that sweater away is the moment he starts taking responsibility for his own healing and accepting that he doesn't need to be essential to everyone in order to matter to someone. He's not magically better, the car is still totaled, and he still has to face the consequences of his actions, and he's still dealing with heartbreak, but he's finally ready to start dealing with the reality instead of running from it. While Laundry Woes shows Mordecai at his lowest point, the seeds of this breakdown were planted much earlier. If you go all the way back to the first season, episode Mordecai and Rigby's, you can see some of the patterns that eventually led to his crisis. In that early episode, Mordecai lies to Margaret about being in a band because he doesn't want her to think he's lame. When she gets excited about seeing them perform, he panics, but can't bring himself to tell her the truth. Instead, he and Rigby desperately try to learn how to play music overnight.
So, you want to become a musician. Bravo.
Eventually accepting help from their future selves, who turn out to be promoting lip syncing. This episode establishes a pattern that follows Mordecai throughout the series. He lies or avoids difficult conversations to prevent immediate embarrassment, but these choices always backfire and create bigger problems. The fear of not being special enough drives him to make choices that ultimately make him less trustworthy and less attractive as a friend and a partner. The good news is that Mordecai's breakdown in Laundry Woes wasn't the end of his story. By the time we get to Rigby's graduation day special in the final season, we see a very different version of Mordecai. He's more mature, more supportive, and more emotionally stable. In that episode, Mordecai has to confront his own jealousy when Rigby achieves something significant, graduating from high school. At first, Mordecai is resentful and doesn't want to help with the graduation party. The old fears are still there. If Rigby becomes more successful, will their friendship change? Will Rigby outgrow him and move on to better things? But the key difference is that this time, Mordecai recognizes his feelings and deals with them. He doesn't let his jealousy fester or make up elaborate schemes to avoid confronting it. When he hears Rigby struggling with his graduation speech,
Let me just, okay, hi. Let's do over. Let me do this over. Well, that's it, Rigby. You lost him and there's no one to bail you out now.
Mordecai puts aside his own issues and shows up to help. He apologizes for being unfair and supports his friend when it matters the most. When he tells Rigby, "You're graduating from high school today, man. You did it," there's genuine pride and happiness in his voice. He's learned that he can celebrate other people's success without it diminishing his own worth. He's discovered that he doesn't have to be the star of every story to be a valuable part of it. This shows real growth. The Mordecai from Laundry Woes would have let his negative feelings build up until they exploded in some destructive way. But the Mordecai from Graduation Day Special has learned to identify his emotions, admit when he's being unreasonable, and take action to make things right. That's what recovery looks like. Not the absence of difficult feelings, but the ability to handle them in healthy ways. Mordecai's breakdown teaches us several important lessons about mental health and emotional resilience. Avoidance makes everything worse. Every time Mordecai tries to avoid a difficult conversation or uncomfortable feeling, the problem got bigger. His refusal to be honest about his feelings for Margaret led to the disaster at the wedding. His inability to process his grief and guilt after the breakup led to the delusional road trip. Isolation feeds the spiral. Mordecai's lowest point came when he literally pushed away the people who cared about him. When he kicked Rigby out of the car, he cut himself off from reality and perspective. That's when the hallucinations started. Mental health struggles are always harder to handle alone, especially when you're convinced that everyone is going to leave anyway. Rock bottom can be a turning point. Crashing into that statue was devastating, but it was also what Mordecai needed to wake up from his delusion. Sometimes people need to hit their lowest point before they're ready to start climbing back up. The crash forced him to see reality clearly for the first time in the episode. Recovery is a process, not an event. Throwing the sweater away was an important moment, but it wasn't a magic cure. Mordecai still had to deal with the consequences of his actions and work on building healthier patterns. He had to learn that his worth wasn't dependent on being indispensable to others. Real change takes time and effort. Growth is possible. The difference between early Mordecai and later Mordecai shows that people can learn and change. He went from someone who repeatedly made the same mistakes to someone who could recognize his flaws and make better choices. He learned that people can love and still grow beyond him, that relationships can change without ending. That kind of growth gives hope to anyone struggling with their own patterns of destructive behavior. Laundry Woes stands out because it treats mental health struggles with respect and accuracy. It doesn't make Mordecai's breakdown dramatic or entertaining. Instead, it shows the quiet desperation of someone who can't cope with their problems anymore. It shows how trauma can make people act in ways that seem completely irrational to everyone else, but make perfect sense to them in the moment. The episode also doesn't offer easy solutions. Mordecai doesn't get better because someone gives him good advice or because he has a sudden realization. He gets better because he hits bottom, recognizes where he is, and makes choices to start dealing with reality instead of running from it. That's a much more honest portrayal of how recovery actually works. And a show full of surreal adventures and magical creatures, Laundry Woes is grounded in very human emotions. It reminds us that even in the most fantastical setting, the most important stories are often about people trying to figure out how to handle their feelings and relationships. Mordecai's breakdown is a window into what happens when someone's coping mechanisms completely fail them. The episode also shows the importance of friendship and support systems. Rigby never gives up on Mordecai. Even when Mordecai literally abandons finds him on the side of the road, he runs for miles to catch up and make sure his friend is okay. That kind of loyalty and persistence can make all the difference when someone is struggling. Regular Show was always about the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby, but Laundry Woes shows what that friendship looks like when tested by serious mental health struggles. Rigby recognizes the warning signs, tries to intervene, refuses to give up when things get bad, and celebrates the small victories when Mordecai starts to recover. That's what real friendship looks like during crisis. In the end, Laundry Woes teaches us that breakdown and recovery are both part of the human experience. Everyone faces moments when their usual ways of coping aren't enough anymore. The key is recognizing when that happens, accepting help from people who care about us, and being willing to do the hard work of building healthier patterns. Mordecai's journey from crisis to recovery shows that change is possible, even when things seem hopeless. That's a lesson worth remembering. Whether you're a cartoon blue jay or just someone trying to figure out how to handle life's challenges, sometimes the most important step forward is finally admitting where you really are and deciding you're ready to start climbing back up. If you watched this video this far, why not subscribe? And I'll see you in the next one.